5 bikes fanned out across the back road and boxed him in, engine snarling, and the man in front let his boot down in the gravel and grinned like he had all evening to do this. "Long way from anywhere, son," he said over the idol. "You lost? This ain't your road." Isaiah Cole did not run. There was nowhere to run, and he knew it. 16 years old, on a shoulder of county blacktop at dusk, with 5 hostile riders throttling him in, and he'd been raised to know exactly how much running would help, which was none. He didn't beg either. He stood beside his own small dirt bike, the one his uncle had given him, and he looked at the man in front, and he reached into his jacket, slow, and took out his phone. "You'd better call your mama," the man laughed. "Tell her you'll be late." "I'm not calling my mama," Isaiah said. His voice didn't shake, which surprised even him. He thumbed one contact and put the phone to his ear and looked the man dead in the eye. "You might want to leave before he answers." Because what the 5 of them didn't know, what they could not have known. Seeing only a black teenager alone on an empty road, easy, isolated, theirs, was whose number the boy had just dialed. And that within the hour, from both ends of that county, more than 1,000 bikes would come. Isaiah was 16 and had been, for 2 years, a boy learning to carry a grief too big for him. His father was dead. Wendell Cole, the man everyone for 200 miles had called preacher. Gone in a highway wreck when Isaiah was 14. A truck that drifted across a line on a wet night. And Wendell Cole had been, in the life that mattered outside their house, a founding member of a brotherhood that the boy had grown up inside, without fully understanding what it would come to mean to him. The Sentinels were not what the 5 men blocking that road assumed a motorcycle club to be. They were a veterans riding association, most of them men who'd served, some who hadn't. Working men, mechanics, welders, truck drivers, a pastor, a school bus driver, who rode together and, more than rode, showed up. They escorted fallen soldiers home. They guarded the funerals of the young from the people who came to picket them. They ran toy drives at Christmas and stood watch outside courthouses when a child had to testify against someone who'd hurt them. Wendell Preacher Cole had helped build it, chapter by chapter, on one plain principle he'd said to his son, more times than the boy could count, on rides and at the supper table and, the last time, in a hospital hallway that Isaiah tried not to think about. "You never ride alone, son, not the road, not the trouble, not the grief, none of it. That's the whole of it. A man is only as alone as he lets himself believe he is." When Wendell died, 1,000 bikes had come to bury him. Isaiah, 14, had ridden behind the hearse in a rumble he felt in his chest for weeks. And the men his father built the brotherhood with had put their hands on the boy's shoulders one by one and told him he had 1,000 fathers now, and he had not, in his grief, quite believed them. His actual uncle, his father's younger brother Curtis, road named Deacon, had taken over Wendell's chapter, the largest in the region, and had become the nearest thing to a father Isaiah had left. Curtis had given the boy his first dirt bike and taught him to ride it, and told him every time he left the house, the same thing his brother used to say, "You never ride alone." Isaiah had nodded and half believed it, the way you half believe a thing until the night it gets tested. The one thing he carried everywhere was his father's patch, the small embroidered Sentinel's rocker cut from Wendell's own vest, the cloth soft and faded from a decade of weather, sewn now to the inside of Isaiah's jacket over his heart, where nobody could see it. It was there that evening on the back road. His hand had brushed it when he reached for the phone. The 5 men had found him because he'd taken the long way home from his uncle's shop, the back roads, the way his father used to like, and they'd been looking for exactly what they'd found, someone alone, someone they'd decided about on sight. The man in front, the one the others called Vic, ran a small crew that rode mean and drank meaner, the kind that mistakes cruelty for respect and an isolated road for a ride. They'd seen a black kid on a little bike and seen Spot. Vic acted the first time with the box scene and the green and the This Century Road. He acted the second time when Isaiah reached for the phone, kicked his stand down, and stepped off his bike and walked in close, crowding the boy, close enough that Isaiah could smell the beer, and put one hand flat on the boy's chest and shoved. Not hard, just enough to say I can. Put the phone away, Vic said. Ain't nobody coming out here. The other four laughed and rolled their bikes tighter, and one of them said something about the boy's bike and something else under it. The kind of thing that's deniable in daylight and plain as day at dusk on an empty road. And here is the moment the story turns on, and it belonged to Isaiah alone, because for one terrible stretch he thought his father might have been wrong. The call didn't connect. One bar, out on that back road, and the phone showed the call trying and not going through. And Vic's hand was on his chest, and the light was going, and Isaiah stood there with a dead phone against his ear, and felt the whole thing his father promised him start to come apart. You never ride alone. But he was alone. He was a boy on a road in the dark, with 5 grown men and a phone that wouldn't ring, and his father was 2 years dead and couldn't help him. And for a few seconds, Isaiah Cole believed, all the way down, that the brotherhood and the promise and the 1,000 fathers were a thing men say at funerals and don't mean. His hand went, without his deciding it, to the patch inside his jacket, his father's soft faded rocker over his hat. Then the call connected, one bar held, and a voice he'd known his whole life said, Isaiah, what's wrong? He didn't cry and he didn't yell. He'd been raised better than both. Uncle Curtis, he said even, watching Vic's face. I'm on the old mill road by the creek bridge. There's 5 of them got me boxed in. One's got hands on me. A pause. I'm not hurt. I need you to come. There was a silence on the line about 1 second long, and then his uncle said the only thing he said, in a voice gone very quiet and very flat, don't move, and don't swing at anybody. We're already close. Stay on the phone. And Isaiah understood then the thing that turned the whole night, the thing the 5 men couldn't have known when they picked this road. It was the eve of the regional memorial run. Hundreds of sentinels from a dozen chapters were already in the county that night, gathered at a fairground 20 minutes off, engines warm, there to ride the next morning for the men they'd lost. Wendell Cole's name among them. His uncle wasn't an hour away with a few friends. He was 20 minutes away with 1,000. Vic saw something change in the boy's face and didn't like it. Who's that? He said. Who'd you call? My uncle Isaiah said. He leads the sentinels. There's 1,000 of them at the fairground tonight for a memorial ride. He put the phone down at his side, the line still open. My father was one of them. I told you might want to leave before he answered. He looked at the man, 16 and steady now, because the promise had held and he knew it in his chest like the rumble behind a hearse. You've got a few minutes to be gone. I'd take them. Vic laughed, but it had gone thin, and one of the 4 behind him had already looked down the dark road toward the fairground and gone still. They had it before they saw it. You feel a thing like that in the ground fast, a low thunder rolling up out of the dusk from both ends of Mill Road at once, headlights blooming over the rise, in a line that didn't end. The sound building until it wasn't a sound anymore, but a pressure, the pressure of 1,000 engines coming for one of their own. The sentinels came from the north and from the south and closed off that road the way a tide closes off a sandbar. Disciplined, no shouting, no revving for shore, just an ocean of riders flowing in and stopping and cutting their engines rank by rank until the only sound left on Mill Road was 5 men's bikes idling in the middle of 1,000 that had gone silent. Not one sentinel threw a punch. That was the thing Isaiah would carry the rest of his life. His uncle Curtis rode to the front and put his boot down and looked at the 5 men boxed now, inside a brotherhood, 1,000 strong, and he did not touch them, and did not let anyone else touch them. He looked at his nephew first. "You hurt?" "No, sir," Isaiah said. "He put his hand on you. Once he shoved me. That's all." And here the boy did the thing that made him his father's son, because 1,000 angry men were waiting on a word, and the word was his to give. "Uncle Curtis, nobody swings. Dad wouldn't. We don't do it that way." He said it loud enough to carry, and it carried. And 1,000 riders who had come ready to do whatever the boy needed had the boy need something harder than a fight, which was for them not to. Curtis looked at his nephew a long moment, and something moved in his face that was pride and grief together, and he nodded. "No," he agreed. "We don't do it that way. Somebody call the sheriff. And get the cameras up." They had already gone up. 100 phones were filming from 100 saddles, and it turned out one of the sentinels near the back had been recording since before he cut his engine, had the whole thing, Vic's hand on the boy's chest, the box in, the words. The reckoning ran on that, on the levers that are actually real, and it ran clean. The 5 men had cornered and laid hands on a miner on a public road. And there were 1,000 witnesses and clear video, and when the sheriff's cars came up Mill Road, the sentinels parted to let them through and then closed again so no one drove off, and the deputies took names and took the footage and took Vic and his crew, and it went the way it goes when the evidence is that plain and the witnesses that many. Not with a beating that would have made martyrs of bullies, but with charges that stuck, in a courtroom, on paper, because it was done right. Isaiah gave grace before anyone thought to ask it of him, which is the mark of the thing his father built. When it was over and the crew was in the deputy's cars, one of the younger ones, barely older than Isaiah himself, scared now, the meanness gone out of him, caught the boy's eye through the window, and Isaiah, who had every right to look away, gave him a small nod instead. "I hope it's the last road you do that on," was all he said, quiet, not for a crowd. He didn't gloat. There were 1,000 men who'd have carried him on their shoulders, and he asked them not to. He'd gotten the one thing that mattered, which was proof, at 16, on a dark road, that his father had told him the truth. The crowd's shame that night belonged to the 4 who'd ridden with Vic. One of them, the youngest, wrote a letter later from where he ended up to the boy that Isaiah kept. A letter that said he'd been raised on the road to think a crew was something you got by scaring people, and that he'd learned in one night that he'd never once seen the real thing until 1,000 men rode in and didn't touch him. The boy wrote him back. That was Isaiah too. The sentinels rode their memorial the next morning, 1,000 strong, and this time Isaiah Cole rode near the front beside his uncle, and when they passed the place on the route where the names of the fallen were read, Wendell Preacher Cole's name went out over the sound system, and 1,000 engines answered it, and Isaiah felt it in his chest the way he had at 14, except that this time he understood it all the way down. Months on, Isaiah's uncle started something in the chapter, and it grew out of that road. They called it the Ride-Alongs, a program pairing the club's veterans with kids in the county who were growing up the way Isaiah nearly had, fatherless or alone, or convinced the world was a road you rode by yourself, teaching them to ride and to fix an engine and, more than that, showing up for them the way the Brotherhood showed up on Mill Road, at the school events, with no parent in the seats, at the courthouses, at the hard mornings. They named it, quietly, for Preacher, and Isaiah, 16 and then older, helped run it, because a boy who'd land on a dark road, that he was never alone, had decided to spend his life making sure other kids learned it younger and easier than he had. He wore his father's patch on the outside of his own vest now, and, the day the chapter voted him in on his 18th birthday, the soft faded rocker moved from the inside of a jacket over his hat to the back of a cat where the whole world could see it. And every time he swung a leg over a bike, alone on a road at dusk the way he'd been that night, he'd hear his father. And then he'd hear the thunder coming up out of the dark from both directions, and he'd know it for the truest thing he owned. You never ride alone. Not the road, not the trouble, not the grief. A man is only as alone as he lets himself believe he is. 5 men had looked at a black teenager by himself on an empty road and seen someone with no one. Easy, isolated, theirs. They'd read the whole situation exactly wrong, the way cruelty always does, because they could not imagine that the quietest, most alone-looking person on that road was standing inside a brotherhood 1,000 strong that would cross a county in the dark at the sound of his voice. And the boy never had to raise a hand, because the truest strength was never in the fight. It was in the 1,000 who came, and in the one who, when they got there, was strong enough to tell them to stand down. If you've ever felt cornered and alone, and found out in the hardest hour exactly how many people were behind you, tell us about it in the comments. We read every one. The moral rides plain as a headlight in the dark. No one who is loved is ever truly alone, and the people who prey on the isolated have always misjudged the quiet ones worst of all. Real strength doesn't throw the punch it's owed. It shows up in numbers too great to fight, and then it chooses, out of that power, to let the Lord do what fists never should. Who first taught you that you never ride alone? The one who showed up when you were sure no one would? Tell us below. If Isaiah's night meant something to you, share it with someone who's feeling cornered and alone on their own dark road tonight. And wherever you're standing, boxed in, outnumbered, certain no one's coming, may you have the steadiness not to run and not to beg. The people who'll cross a county at the sound of your voice, and the deep quiet strength, when they arrive, to be the one who says nobody swings tonight,